So now we know that we're probably dreaming at least 4 times a night, and that's always very interesting. In fact, the reason why I chose to do this chapter at the end of class is because it's been my experience that students are extremely exhausted by the end of the semester, and they just want, I'm done, I'm finished, let's just take the final. And so it's really hard to find something at the end of the semester where students will still be like really interested in. But whenever I pull up this thing about dreaming, everybody seems to be very, oh, why? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over four different theories of dreaming. And I know there's three on this slide, but then the next slides will have the fourth one. But what I did for you on your website is I directed you to a website that I think does a good job of answering a lot of the questions that I get in class. Because as soon as I get to this theories of dreaming, the hands go up and they have all kinds of questions about dreaming. So what I'd like you to do is after I finish this segment about dreaming, is I'd like you to go to that web page and just start at the top and read all the questions and answers about dreaming, because I think that that webpage has done a great job with answering a lot of the questions that I get. Okay, so let's start. So one theory of dreaming is Sigmund Freud's. And I think you guys can surmise that Sigmund Freud says that dreams are unconscious wish fulfillment. So he says all day long we're repressing the id. We're pushing it down, pushing it down so that we can function in society. Okay, but the id is something that we were born with to help us to survive. So we're suppressing that. So when we go to sleep at night, we finally can let the id be free, let the id have everything that it wants, and it's kind of like this safety mechanism that, you're not pushing that down, pushing it down. You're giving it its time to explore and have everything that it wants. So he says, if you remember, the id is a baby. Remember, from 0 to 1? And so he says that, dreams don't have a specific language. They have symbolism because the unconscious doesn't have a lot of language, especially the id. So he says that you have to interpret the symbolism in dreams. So, as you know, there's lots of sexual symbols in dreams because he lived in a time when they were very sexually repressed. So a purse would be seen as a vagina, a jar would be a vagina. A lot of the buildings and snakes and things like that, of course, are a penis. A king and a queen in a dream might be your parents. Vermin in your dream, like rats and things, might be your siblings. You can look online for all the Freudian symbolism. But what he says is we have to interpret them as there are our unconscious desires. Is when we have these dreams, it's symbolic of what our unconscious knows or what our unconscious wants. Okay, so there's one theory. Let's see, Carl Jung. So Carl Jung was Freud's probably most famous student. Sorry about that. Um, but he broke with Freud over dreaming. He broke with Freud over a few issues, but dreaming was a significant one. So Carl Jung is a really, really interesting psychologist, but they don't teach him much in school. You'd have to be a psych major, and you'd have to get to about a 400 level before they'd teach you Carl Jung. He's a kind of out there psychologist. Sorry about this. Okay. Um, so what he said is he says dreams are wisdom. So I always ask my class, I say, okay, so how many of you have had a dream come true? And what I was talking about is that you saw something happen in a dream. You had never seen that person before, and then all of a sudden you met that person, or you saw yourself in a dream have the exact conversation, and then you had like a deja vu experience later. And that's what Carl Jung says. See, Carl Jung, he's like I said, he's a kind of out there psychologist. And so that's why he's not taught much, but his theories are really interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of you would find them fascinating, so if you get a chance and you want to read up on him, you might want to check him out. But he believed in the theory of synchronicity, which is that everything happens for a reason. And he believed that there's like an energy in the world, an energy force, kind of called the collective unconsciousness. And so he says when our brain goes into the state of dreaming, then your brain is in a state of consciousness that it can tap into the collective consciousness. And so wisdom from the universe can come through dreams because our brain is in a state to receive that form of energy. So here's an example of something. So he was a psychiatrist, so he had many patients. And just as like a teacher has many students, it's like the students that you pay attention to a lot of times are the ones that are constantly asking questions, constantly demanding your time, maybe and the ones that are quiet and don't ask for much, sometimes you overlook them. And that's what was happening with this particular patient is she was very quiet. She never asked anything from him. She just kind of was one of those good patients. So one night he was in bed and he had a dream of her standing over him like a big giant looking down on him. And he woke up from that dream and he says, "Oh my goodness." And he went down to find her. What he finds is she's crying and she says, "Oh, Dr. Young, I can't live in this world anymore. I just have to end it all. I want to commit suicide. I didn't want to bother you because you're so busy, but I just can't take it anymore." And so this is kind of the example that he said is he said the dreams bring you the wisdom of what's needed in the world. And so she was calling to him in the dreams. So it's kind of an interesting one for you to think about, but I guess something that I have to ask is let's take there's this woman and she was going through a divorce and she had a dream where there was four cars. Her car was flipped over upside down and totally, I mean, it was just completely wrecked. And then her husband's car was there, and his car was not flipped upside down. It was just dented, and it was in an accident, but it could drive away. And then there were two other cars there, and one was really wrecked, and then there was another one that was not so wrecked. It was could drive away. And so she saw that accident, and she said to her husband in the accident, she said, "But you're going to have to find a different way because everything, there's been this terrible accident. It just came out of nowhere and the cars are wrecked." And he said, "Well, my car is still drivable, so I'm okay." And then she sat there and thought about it and she said, "Well, I guess insurance will pay for mine, so I'll be getting a new car." So how would we interpret something like that? We could interpret it as, "Oh gosh, it's a sign that there's an accident coming. Be careful, there's a sign that there's an accident coming." Or you could use the symbolism, the car is moving through life and that her life was totally turned upside down and she would have to find a new car to get a new way to get through life, but that his was dented, but he could still go through life through with a car, with his car. So there's some kind of dynamics of how are you going to interpret this and is it real or is there some kind of unconscious desire there with Sigmund Freud that maybe she has a death wish from this accident with the car and that the symbolism of the accident is that, she kind of wants a terrible thing to happen and then something there. Who knows? It's very hard to determine about these dreamings, but I try to show you a way of looking at them in the different ways that you can think about them. So Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's are some interesting theories. To just summarize, Freud says that dreams are wish fulfillment. They're a way of our unconscious getting what it wants, getting the things that it wants. Maybe she wanted an accident to happen to him and him to be dented, but she was going to get a new car. Who knows? With Jung, he says that dreams are like this wisdom from the collective unconscious. So if you think of like a kind of new agey thing, that would be kind of more of the Carl Jung philosophy. But now let's look at this one, the activation synthesis hypothesis. This paper came out in the, I believe, 1966, somewhere in 1965, in the late 60s, and this paper caused more controversy than any other paper in the history of psychology. And the reason why it did is, see, dream interpretation was really big in Freud's and Jung's time. I mean, before like around the 1940s, 1950s, all in there, when you went to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, you wouldn't just go in once a week for an hour. You'd go in 3 times a week for an hour, and a lot of it would be focused on interpreting dreams, that's the way to heal you. And so then this paper comes out, the activation synthesis hypothesis by Hobbes and McCarley, and they say, you know what, our research is kind of pointing to that the brain is doing something during REM sleep, whether it be house cleaning or or something. The brain is trying to, the activity, it's trying to do something. And so as it's cleaning up or making new pathways or something, the brain has to be active during REM sleep. And then what dreams are is they're just the way of the brain making sense of this random neuronal firing. So the definition of the activation synthesis hypothesis is dreams are the cortex trying to make sense of random activation from the pons. So the pons is the part of the brain that's heavily involved in sleep, and it sends up messages to the brain to wake it up a little bit or to keep it functioning, because if you kept it at the low levels of delta waves, it wouldn't function well. And so then what Hobbes and McCarley are saying with this activation synthesis hypothesis is that dreams are nothing. They're just these byproducts of the pons sending up messages to the cortex to say, wake up, do your work, clean yourself up, rejuvenate yourself, and then the cortex tries to make sense of it. So, I don't know. I don't know which is right. Do dreams have deep meaning or do they not? Let's look at some other theories that kind of support, some other explanations about dream that kind of support the activation synthesis hypothesis, and they may support all three of these. So the first thing that I want to look at is, you try to figure it out. Look at this graph. So here's a premature baby that sleeps for 8 to 20 hours a day, and it spends 80% of its time in REM. So that's 15 to 16 hours in REM sleep. REM sleep is where our dreams are. An infant sleeps 16 hours a day. 50% of those 16 hours are 8 hours are in REM sleep. Okay, now it declines as childhood progresses, and by the time you're a young adult, your age, you sleep about 8 hours a day, spend 28% of the time in REM, and so you spend about 2 hours a night dreaming. As you become elderly, over the age of, I'd say 65, 6 hours a day, you spend less than 10% of the time in REM. So as you age, you need less and less sleep, and as you age, there's less and less time spent in REM. So looking at this graph, what do you think REM sleep could be? What's another explanation? Well, I hope you can see that it could be brain development. See here, a premature baby's brain is not fully developed. So maybe the 80% of the time is necessary for neuronal growth. An infant, they say that an infant learns more in the first 3 years of life than any other time. And so spending this time in REM sleep would allow the neuronal growth. As what happens throughout life is that we're born with more neurons than we'll ever use. And so what life is a pruning process. Is the neurons that are not used, the pathways that are not strengthened, are just going to be, the neurons will die if they just aren't used, and the pathways will kind of disintegrate. So what happens in the brain is a pruning process, and so by the time you get to be a young adult, less and less neurons to prune. And as you get older and older, I think you guys have heard, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. People get to be a certain way and they're not going to change much. And again, is that because, there's not as much neuronal growth that needs to be going on here. So maybe what dreams are is similar to the activation synthesis hypothesis. Maybe dreams are a way of the brain stimulating neuronal development, stimulating brain development. Another thing that goes with this is if you look at sleep and memory. This is something really good for you guys to look at. They think that maybe dreams are a way of the brain strengthening memories. It could be neuronal development or it could be memory consolidation. So it says, consider this information. A group of students were divided into two groups who were presented with the same lecture material. Group 1 went about their daily activities. Group 2 went to sleep after learning the material. So over here, they learned the material and then they went through their daily activities. Over here, they learned the material and then they went to sleep. So after 1 hour, this group remembered 80% of the information. After 1 hour here, this group remembered 90% of the information. After 2 hours, this group was down to 60%. 2 hours, they got to go back to sleep and then they were woken up again, 80% of the information. After 8 hours of them going through and doing what they have to do, they remembered 30%. And look, after 8 hours, they remembered 70%. So the reason why this is good for you guys is as an online class, you can pick and choose when you listen to your lectures. And so maybe it would be a good thing to listen to your lectures and take notes and organize it right before you go to sleep, because maybe it's going to consolidate it better than, say, somebody who takes the class at 10 a.m. in the morning and then goes through and does all their daily activities. Even people who take night classes, if they take a night class that goes from 7 to 10, they learn the material, they still have to drive home and maybe eat dinner afterwards to get ready for bed, but you guys could listen to your lecture right before you go to sleep. It's a great thing about this class.